Hi.
Hey. So what topic did you want to start with first?
You choose.
I think that the pricing issue is actually quite interesting, so we can start with that.
In our company, we are having, in Ideato, we are having 2 teams, both releasing stories as on a per unit basis, okay? So they just release one story. Our contracts are time and materials. And while this provides us with a very safe contracting that we honor by loyalty and blah blah blah, actually doesn't incentivize us in getting in developing a better process, because we are not incentivized in doing more in less time. Well, actually, if we are only incentivized in the sense that way we can manage more customers, because the shorter the lead time for a given action, for a given user story, the sooner you get free people to process another request. But
and the other incentive would be that the customers are happier, right?
Yeah.
So that you don't get more money for that because the contract is upfront time and material.
Yeah. So on the other hand, it's quite a defensive contract, because we know that as long as we work, we get paid for what we work. It never goes below the bottom line, okay? Though, last week we provided our teams during last retrospective, we decided to give all the teams budgeting information. So every team has its own expenses data and its own revenues data, so that they can compute their net income. And that's very good, because now you got people back together on the topic of how we raise the bar.
Yeah. Okay, but that's one maybe there's a few topics that we could discuss here. So one that comes to mind immediately is this extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation, because the moment you put money in the topic, then there's a risk that the money becomes the reason rather than the quality of the product or the type of product that you are developing, or the relationship with the customer, whatever is the intrinsic motivation. And then there's the other thing, which is the beyond budgeting kind of way of thinking that comes out of that we saw in the keynote in Berlin, where one of the things that Duarte was talking about is this idea that you can predict the future, right? So the time and material contracts can be seen, even though the scale is a bit shorter, can be seen as a big design upfront type of budgeting, right? You look at what you need upfront without actually seeing anything, then you evaluate the cost of that upfront without actually doing the work, and then you try to fit everything into that. So, and the thing that Duarte was talking about in his talk is that if you ask the person who's going to sell the product, i.e. you guys, how much is it going to take, and how much money is it going to, how much time it takes, and how much money it costs, and then at the same time you're telling, in this case your customers are telling you that now this is your target, because we're going to put that into the contract, then you know where the kind of motivation is, right? You want to create a little bit of buffer. Then at the same time, on the customer side, it's the reverse, which is that, okay, given that this is the amount of money that would take me to get this whatever product or features or stories done, then I'm going to spend that money because I'm promising this to my boss, so I'm going to spend that, even if I wouldn't need to spend all of that. Right? So the customer money because that's what their budgeting process says, which at the same time means that they are not incentivized to discuss what could we get in less time. Because that's the money they have.
Well, actually, it relates more to fixed price contracts, right? When you locate a budget for a project.
Not true, but time and materials contract has an assumption of what the cost and time will be anyway.
Yeah, but...
So it's not in the contract. It becomes an item in the customer's mind and in your mind as well.
It's not in the contract, by the way.
Sorry?
It's not in the contract. So...
No, but you discussed that, right? You discussed while...
Yeah, as an estimation in sort of etymological sense, and so that we can quit the project before or after the first estimated deadline. So it's...
Exactly. But you have no motivation to quit the project before, because that would mean less money. It's time and material.
Actually, it's sort of neutral data because we free people to work on another job waiting in the queue. So, and releasing a project before the real deadline, as long as we have an horizon of planned work to do, is not neither a bad thing or a good thing. It's neutral.
Okay, it is neutral if you assume that the next job will have about the same price, because you are paying salaries per month anyway, so if you are fully employed, then taking the next job is going to have a net effect of zero as the company. But what if the next job would have more value than the current one? Meaning that the amount of time you get paid per day, or per hour, or whatever is the unit, would be higher than the current job that you're in.
We have, for example, we have a uniform pricing, and that's exactly the key point. Because on the other hand, we could just be pricing different prices for different situations, different projects, different values related to given projects. So that's the point. We are now having a uniform pricing, and that's very easy, that's very clear, and that's very well, it becomes fair as long as we earned the trust of our customers. But it's not perfect, because actually from a systemic point of view, it doesn't incentivize us in...
But think about this. If you have a person that hasn't drunk water for a long time, and they are very thirsty, and they are in the desert, and then you have another person who lives next to a fountain with clear water and food to drink, what's the price of a glass of water for the person in the desert?
Exactly. That's different. It's values of things.
Aren't you charging the same price from different types of work?
Well, actually, it suddenly becomes an ethical discussion, and that's interesting for that reason. Because what's the price of a good? Is it inherently defined, or is it to be? It's called market segmentation.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, it's not just about market segmentation, because even within the same segment, you could have different pricing depending on the situation.
Yeah. Okay. It depends.
Let's assume this. Let's say that for some reason you are able to link the amount of work you have in the pipeline to the price you charge. So for every new job that comes into the pipeline, you would increase your price, let's say 10%.
Okay.
Right? So what you want is to get to a point where the amount of work coming in is not too much so that you can't fulfill it, but it's not too little so that you can't charge enough to pay your costs.
Yeah.
Right? And adjusting the price based on the amount of work that is coming in will allow you to, well, understand the flow, or let's say control the inflow of work, of projects.
Yeah.
If you have, let's say, if you have 100 projects in the pipeline and you know it will take you 1 year to get to all of those projects. Then the next project in the pipeline, you can say, okay, it costs you whatever, 10 euros or 20 euros an hour if you do it 1 year from now, and it costs 200 euros an hour if you want it done next month.
Exactly. It's sort of it's the pricing model of airlines companies.
Yeah.
Okay. So the problem with that is that we have there should be it would be very challenging to communicate this pricing, because simple pricing is one of the key for selling volumes. You know, it's like telephone. How do you say? Mobile phones companies. The easier the fares, the easier the acquisition of new customers.
I understand that. So it makes the sales discussion shorter, right? Because the price is up there, it's quite clear. Then the question is, do we spend it or not?
Yeah.
But what if you have too much work to do? I don't know if you do, but imagine that you are in a situation where you have too much work to do. Now, there's something that you have that is of value to the customer coming in to the end of the queue, and that is priority. And that is a value you can add to the price. Now, that doesn't mean that you screw the other customers. That's not what I mean. But it means that, okay.
Yeah, you can mix.
Yeah, you have some. How do you say? You have some leverage, right? You can't be 100% employed all the time if you want to do this. That's what I mean. But the point is that if you could charge for priority, you know, jumping ahead of the queue, which actually, by the way, is quite common in Italy, I hear, that people are selling tickets to museums with the back entrance so that you never have to queue. But you've never been to a museum where they had that?
No.
No?
No.
Jesus, go to a Colosseum.
No, I trust you.
Yeah.
Maybe as an Italian I don't get that kind of fees.
So if you go to maybe that's the reason. So if you go to the Colosseum, for example, at the entrance of the Colosseum there are two prices. There's the price that you pay by going to the ticket office or ticket box and buying the ticket and queuing to get in. And then there's the price you pay to have a guided tour with immediate entrance. And they have two entrances, right? There's the one that you queue to, and then there's the one you go with the guided tour.
So both are officially endorsed.
Yes.
Okay.
So the tour guides, they make the money on the extra price they charge you for the ticket.
Yeah.
And the fact that they give you priority to get in. So they give you a value, which is the guided tour, but then they also get you in faster, which is a very good kind of key selling point for their service. But they charge you a little bit higher. That's the difference, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. What you would be doing is saying to your customers, dear customer, we will charge you this amount and we will do your work as you want it, but you will get to the back of the queue. If you want to get to the front of the queue, and there's a limited number of slots at the front of the queue, obviously, because you can't serve all at the front of the queue, otherwise you wouldn't do anything else for the other customers that are already promised. So there's a limited capacity for the front of the queue. But that limited capacity, you could charge higher value. So that's one way you could leverage your speed, right? Because now, if you're faster with one contract, now you have more slots at the front of the queue before you have to go to the next contract.
Yep.
Right? So that way, you could use your speed as an incremental revenue opportunity and higher price as well. So it would be a bit like scheduling stuff. So you don't tell your customer, your project is the next. You would tell your customer, your project starts on the 17th of October. And then if you're done on the 10th of October, now you have a 7-day project that you can do.
Yeah. We talked about that internally, but I don't remember the counter arguments that came out while we were discussing this model. Probably I can just try to remember. I'll just try to guess how the selling people were concerned about having to explain these to the customers. Because the selling process is part of the chain, and currently that's the area where bottlenecks develop. It's like having
too many ongoing sales processes, or what do you mean by that?
Not having, assuming that I think we agree on this. Assuming that the value in planning is in getting knowledge about a project, and not in the final number that you come up with. There's always the problem to give customers a rough estimation of what the cost will be by the end of the first eventual release, and that's a phase we had. It's acquisition of new customers. It's not even about having planned the thing, having started the development, and having sold them the time and materials model. So they join it, but the problem is that they want to know roughly. It's even too. So not that. How can I say?
So maybe the question that I have now is, are you then really in a times and material situation, even though the contract might say that if the estimation becomes so important in the sales process, then perhaps what you are is in a fixed price contract, even though it's not written.
Well, okay, that's a good point, and I guess that's still something. We shifted to a time and material paradigm because we could rely on trust of our customers, but there's a sort of trust bootstrap problem in acquiring the trust for the first comers, acquiring the trust of customers coming to you for the first time, and actually referral are a good way. So we have first comers working, not requesting us for quotations or rough estimations because they know someone else got satisfied with our model. But that's sometimes the problem is that usually the biggest projects feature the less availability on flexible contracts because they perceive their risk as very high and they want to rest.
Their risk. So that's the one thing that I think the business model generation discussion would be useful here, because I think that in the fixed price contract, what happens is that the business model is that the value that you give your customer is shifting the risks onto you, right? And then the question is then how do you negotiate, and that's why many specifically or especially with the public sector, you end up having a very high cost for change, because that's a way in which the risk is shifted back to the customer. Now, perhaps the right way to get into a model where the value perceived leads to an increase in revenue would be to find some way to make the business model about sharing the risk, so that the risk is in both sides, right? Because the customer might not know what they want, even though they have a list of requirements, and on the other hand, you might encounter technical problems that you can't predict in advance. So, where are the risks, right? So the time and material contract is a bit shifting the risk onto the customer if it is strictly a time and material contract. But at the same time, it is giving them the leverage of deciding, okay, now we've spent enough, so, goodbye.
Yeah.
It depends on how the contract is structured, but, if
No, that's exactly like that. That's.
If you have like a one iteration or one sprint kind of cancellation policy or whatever,
but that's details, so.
But then you have to to get to a point where actually if you do something differently, the value that you provide to the customer increases and therefore he's willing to pay more. So one possible way is what we discussed just a moment ago.
Yep.
So that you make your own business model about creating an added value opportunity, like, not allocating everybody and then selling the top of the queue
Yep.
at higher price. Then another way would be to have in the contract the mandatory bonus by the customer of a value that they would see fit. Like you sell the contract and in one of the clauses it says the customer shall pay a bonus on top of the price agreed here, shall pay a bonus at the end of the project in a value that the customer sees fit. And then the reverse would be that if they don't give a bonus, they have to explain why they don't give a bonus, because that gives you then the feedback cycle of, okay, how can we add more value then later?
Okay. Yeah.
And that way you're kind of giving yourself an upside opportunity, which is not going to be very high. So this is not going to be a high motivation for the customer to pay a bonus. But on the other hand, there's an easier way for the customer not to pay a bonus, which is to explain why not. And that gives you the knowledge you need to increase the value you give the customer later on. Right? So it's not a mandatory bonus, but it's an optional bonus that the customer decides to give you or not. And then they have to decide, is it easier for me to have, let's say, a 1 hour or a 2 hour meeting with these guys and explain why I don't give them the bonus, or is it easier for me to just pay them?
Yeah, I find the first approach more appealing. It's
Which one? You mean
the first one about having a sort of business class service.
Yeah.
I like that most. Probably, I think because this is a sort of perfect. It's perfect on a systemic point of view. It's a way to manage demand, and that's upstream enough to please our lean minds, but because it's solving the problem on very upstream, but it just relays a problem of communication, and maybe it's a focus. It deserves another.
What you just said actually is a good way to communicate it. So you have the standard service, which is that you get into the bottom of the queue. We are already scheduled for this many months, and you get into the bottom of the queue. We get to you when we are free. And then you have the next, which is business class, which is we work immediately with you. We can't guarantee that we can get everybody immediately there, but we will get someone there already, and we start providing value quite early. Like, for example, if you have two teams, maybe one team is free, and then you can shift that team onto that higher value or business class type of contract. So you could even have two contracts, which is like standard service and business class service.
I'm just afraid of this model being too platonic. We are very rational people, okay? Or mainly rational people. We are very we like thinking not necessarily in a logical way, but at least in a rational way, maximizing our benefits. But people out there is not, and even us, even we are maybe not. We don't think the same way when we are involved in another context, and people. I think customers wouldn't. I'm afraid of customers not being happy in seeing themselves choosing the not business value, the not business queue.
Yeah, but that's okay. I understand that.
There's a sort of well. So what does it mean? Does it mean that you would be selling me a crappy software or not answering my calls, not answering my mails?
I understand your point. So your point is, or let me see if I understand. Your point is, I'm concerned that if we create two classes of service, the lower class will be perceived as not worthwhile, and that will give the customers who are in that class the feeling of being mistreated or not
or it can be even more meta, because it could be like, okay, you are just trying to force me into the business class because I want the best service as possible, the best possible service.
But I understand that. But what if the key differentiator between the two different classes is service or response time, right? So the difference is not, you don't get an extra, gift, or you don't get the champagne with the oysters or whatever like you do in the plane. But the only thing that it does, like in this example, would be that you go to the bottom of the queue, which is the normal way we do things, which is the way you already do now, right? When we're free, we get to you. Or then you jump the queue, and jumping the queue is the value that they get. I mean, they get the same quality of service, the same support, they get the same good developers, and so on, but they get it earlier, or at the time that is defined not by them, but by your availability.
Okay, then, so, on another side...
Sorry, go ahead.
Tell me.
No, I was just going to say that, of course, that business class has to be limited, because you guys can't service the top of the line or the top of the queue all of the time. So that would mean not serving the queue at all.
Yeah. So, on the other hand, another solution could be just going back to a sort of fixed price contract, though limiting the scope of the contract to a single user story. So we could just be streamlining a way to estimate and quote single user stories, just to create value and earnings on a per user story basis.
But you mean that the price would be different for every single user story?
Right.
But then you're getting into the point where every discussion is a sales discussion. Do you want to get to that point? I mean, of course, if you think that there's no downside to that, then there's no problem. But what if then what it creates is a mistrust, because now every time I talk to you, I have to understand whether I'm talking about my product or whether I'm trying to reduce your expectations so that you reduce the price. This is my point.
Well, I think, because we would have three poles in this discussion, because we would have the the estimation in terms of story points. We could hope for a transparent value declaration coming from the customer. That is, that's exactly what we ask for when we ask them to prioritize user stories. And
Sorry, go ahead.
And the third pole would be the price, because the price would be just another independent value coming from the first two. And maybe I can imagine of a moment when, by comparison, you can lower the amount by triangulation. You can lower the amount of time spent on discussing the price of every single user story, because there are similar value and similarly estimated user stories that you can just price the same. And so you are just refining the pricing of the whole projects on the edges of the scope.
So would then the goal of that type of approach be to reduce the amount of time you spend on a project that is not adding value to the customer? Because at that time, for every story, I could say as a customer, okay, I really don't need that, I don't want to pay.
Yeah. and you have a good diet. You know, you have. So money is real. So you can have real data and perception of what you're valuing things.
But that's something. So I like the idea of the one-piece flow. I think that makes perfect sense. But you can do the one-piece flow idea with the times and materials, where the price of the story is just the amount of work required to deliver that. And if you already have the trust to get the time and material type of contract, you could just say time and material for every story. Every story is paid, and you bill every story separately.
But actually, currently we are working like that, because we just release every user stories and we invoice for the amount of time spent on the single user story. Blah 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 blah.
Then I don't think that there would be any advantage, or at least I don't see any big difference to the fixed price, where the fixed price is discussed for every user story.
Well, actually, you can, the problem is that if you work, let's say this year we are doing feature A, feature X in 2 hours. So that's 2 hours worth our fee, okay, our fare. Okay, fine. Next year I become better in developing the same. I acquire new technologies and new skills, and I just require half an hour to develop the same feature X. So my invoicing, my revenues are going a quarter down, providing the same value.
Yeah, but so this is why I understand your point, and that's why I would like to get back to what is the business model for you and for the customer. But you can't get more money out of the customer unless the perceived value that they get is higher.
Okay.
Now, if I ask you for story X and it's valued whatever, let's say it takes 2 days and I pay for the 2 days and I'm happy, and you then go to another customer and you deliver the exact same feature but on a different system, and you have to refactor more and so on, it takes 4 days. Now, the question for you is the customer of the second case where it takes more time, is he happier than the first case? Because you actually get more money in the second case than in the first case.
Exactly, and that's what we want. We don't want to happen. We don't want it to happen. We are concerned about providing real value and not not just real costs.
So then maybe the one thing that we need to do to get to that point is to decouple the value from the effort.
Right, exactly. Cost and price are different concepts. They are related, so we can deduce a price, even also considering the cost. But the price is not the cost. It's not a one-to-one relationship.
But how are they different in your customer's mind?
That's what I mean. That's what I want to spot in having a negotiation on every single user story. Because so far, we're just assuming that every user story has the same
Sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say, don't you have that same negotiation already happening now? Because now, every time you talk about the user story, you are actually talking about price of the user story. But in a different way, you're talking about time. So, okay, if you do this and this and this, then it takes us 3 days, and if you do this and this and this, it takes us 1 day.
Yeah, actually, there's no negotiation on the revenues for us. Because...
Well, there is. I mean, implicit.
Right? No, it's bound to the cost. We get less if we work less, but there's no way to get the same for a smarter solution. So, our way nowadays is very safe, but I would like it to be more performing.
So what you would like to have, if I understand it correctly, is some way to charge for value, invoice the value rather than the cost.
Right, exactly.
Only invoice the cost, because that's what customers understand. They understand the cost.
Right. So, and that's very easy for them, because as soon as we are very honest, and because time and material contracts expose them to, we could just fake something needs 10 hours long effort instead of 2 hours and get 5 times the well deserved. But we are not like that, and we're providing value in a very honest way. By the way, I'm not satisfied with that, because I don't want to sell costs. I want to sell value, and I want to, as every company does, I want to lower the costs for a given value so that my income gets higher. Tell me.
What is the value that you give your customer that is above the cost that you have? I mean, let's just speculate. Imagine that what you do is work for an e-commerce site, and you're developing what they ask you, and then at the same time that you're developing what they ask you, you suggest a different feature, and you say, okay, we could do this feature, and we believe it would have an impact on how many customers you turn into a sale that visit your site. And then you have a way to measure it, and you say that if we do this feature on our cost, but we get X percentage of your revenues from the use of this feature, and then now you're linking your business case to the customer's business.
Yeah, that's one solution.
Yeah, at that point it makes sense to talk about value, because you are actually not developing software, you're developing the product with the customer, and then you can share the upside, right?
Yeah, even in Extreme Programming Explained, Ken Beck talked about pay-per-use, that's one of the solutions, and that's one way to shorten the pipeline, so you get into a partnership with your customer.
Yes.
But that's first, not every customer is available in sharing their revenues with you.
That is true.
Second, and not less important, you are required to believe in your customer's idea. While I don't want to marry every idea coming from my customers. I don't want to be an entrepreneur with.
Because this is incremental revenue, then what this means is that, for example, if you add a feature to a particular website that does e-commerce, and you get a cut of the revenue that is generated by that feature, then what that means is that that's incremental revenue forever.
Yeah, that's well, actually.
And then you get into the power law, which is what the black swan is about. It's where you do a lot of features that have no revenue, but you do one that has huge revenue.
Yeah, that could expose you to white swans.
Yes, that would expose you to the white swans, the reverse of the black swans, or a positive black swan, where something happens very
unexpectedly and positive, and you get high and high.
Very rarely, but has a huge impact, like a disproportional impact. And funnily enough, this is what I believe software is all about. This is my understanding of software. I call it the law of disproportional consequences. My view is that the whole game of developing software is not to add features, but it is to find the one feature that has a disproportional impact on the revenues that you can generate from the use of software, because software is agnostic to value. care, right? The value comes on how the customers perceive those bits running on a CPU. So that's what I mean by the law of disproportional consequences, that if we believe that it is so, if we believe that in software we have this inherent law of disproportional consequences, then what we should be doing is investing most of our time in figuring out what is the feature that delivers the most value, rather than delivering many features to fulfill some feature list that your competitors have in a check mark.
Okay, so I see and raise. So if you are ready to invest your part of your safety in the chance to get a white swan on someone else's software, why don't we all build our own ideas, getting back to a startup state of mind instead of delivering services to other firms?
It's easier to get a little amount of money than it is to get a huge amount of money. So if the service business model is about recurring revenue, so you make the service so easy to buy that you're constantly selling that service, and you get recurring revenue all the time. The other option is to do many small things. One of them might succeed, and then you make shitloads of money with that.
Yeah, maybe we are looking for, actually in Ideato, during the last 2 weeks, we are wondering whether there could be a sort of mixed model, a sort of mixed business model. While we are selling services and we have partnership with our customers, as you said 1 moment ago, we could just be starting a few services up on our own. So we have that's the point, that's Taleb's point in the Black Swan, so that we have very small chaotic scopes, exposing ourselves to a good white swan one day or the other. Because even on a mixed policy, even starting your own products is like getting new customers with new ideas which to join.
So that's how you're figuring out would be the way to use your extra speed, right? Because then you get more.
Exactly. So if we deliver, that's exactly what is coming out from the income statement that we are using since last week. The faster we get in delivering value to external customers, the more time we get to work on our own projects.
Yes, and then you use those projects as possible incremental revenue projects.
On a power law, yeah, because they are products, so they just can be.
That's different. I don't think that just creating products will get you into that power law. If you have to create many products,
Yep.
just one, and then you have to maintain them, which adds costs. Then there's the problem that you might have no clue what kind of business model, what kind of environment generates the power law. So if I give you an example, the app business, now everybody's talking about mobile apps, the app business is a power law business.
Yeah.
You have like 99.999% of the people who develop apps will never make any money.
Yeah.
Like zero money. The average return on investment for mobile apps last year was 11 years, so it will take on average 11 years to get any money out of that. But then there are some crazy guys like the Angry Birds dudes, Rovio
Yeah.
company, make like shitloads of money.
Yeah, it's like books, it's like singers, it's like a social market, actually.
Yeah. So the question is, there's no guarantee that playing that game will give you any money. So yeah, so that's what we're talking about. So then you have to have a mixed business model where you have some insured revenue that keeps you going, and then you have the experiments in the background.
Yeah, exactly. Though, wait, we have to take a good old point back, because if you want a business to a mediocristan business sustaining your chance to invest in extremistan business, meaning that for anyone who will watch this screencast, mediocristan is about linearly scalable business, and extremistan is about any business that scales up on a power law. So, if we keep a mediocristan business, the time and material model is not supporting us that good, because the more space we free for our own products, or for enterprise. Enterprise is not the right word. The less we take, the less it takes to complete a given feature, the less we get paid.
Money you have to invest in it.
Exactly.
So there's two problems. One, how to keep the revenues from the mediocristan business so that you don't have a drop that would prevent you from investing in the extremistan.
Exactly.
So that's problem one. And then the second is to figure out what kind of business environment could generate a power law distribution.
Exactly.
And so that you have some opportunity, some insight as to how to exploit that. So we need to figure out what are the characteristics of an extremistan business environment.
Yeah.
Because we need to identify them. And then second, we need to figure out in that particular business that follows the power law, what are the characteristics that would lead to a power law distribution of money. So in the case of Taleb, what he talks about in the book is that he bet against the banking sector. And by betting against the banking sector, he made shitloads of money, because the banking sector was betting on there will never be a big recession, we can always grow our revenues, blah, blah, blah. And then Taleb was of the opinion that it is very likely and it is very frequent that the opposite happens, that the big crash comes. So I bet on a crash. So those were things that we could understand, right? So there's one part of the business which is the majority, which bets on nothing bad will ever happen. And then there's the other part of the business, which is Taleb in this case, which knows that actually their risk models are totally wrong and something bad will happen for sure, and it's going to be really, really bad. So I'm going to bet against them, and then I make loads of money.
Yeah.
Now, you need to find a business that answers these characteristics, and also find what is the defining characteristic of the power law.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this kind of reflection is well worth a couple of weeks of thinking and for the next call.
Yeah, definitely. There's lots of stuff here.
Okay? So, Vasco, thank you.
Thank you, Jacopo.
Ciao.